It was June 19th, 1972, at Madison Square Garden, in front of more than 20,000 screaming fans. Elvis Presley was in full command of the staging, till he noticed a young woman fighting her way to the front. When security moved to push her back, Elvis stopped everything. And what happened next left him in tears. The summer night in New York was already humming when the lights inside Madison Square Garden dimmed to black. 20,000 people inhaled as one, waiting. And then an explosion of sound. The brass section kicked, the drums rolled, and there he was. Elvis Presley stepped into the spotlight. White jumpsuit glittering with rhinestones. Eagle crest catching every flashbulb in the arena. The roar was unlike anything else in music at the time. It wasn't polite, applause, it was sad. The floor shook. Women clutched the barricades. Men craned over shoulders. Teenagers screamed themselves hoarse. Camera flashes fired like lightning storms, illuminating Elvis as he swept across the stage with that half grin that could calm or ignite an entire city. Reporters, seated along the press row, scribbled frantically, noting each song on the set list, while ushers in red jackets tried to maintain a semblance of order in the aisles. This wasn't just another concert. This was history in the making. The Garden had seen championship fights, political rallies, and famous rock bands. But on June 19th, 1972, it belonged to Elvis alone. He opened strong, launching into That's All Right with a swagger that made the horn section dance behind him. His voice, warm, rich, unmistakable, poured over the crowd like honey. When he moved into Proud Mary, the entire lower bowl of the Garden seemed to sway together, arms raised. Thousands of voices echoing the chorus back at him. What's it like to stand in a crowd that size? To feel your chest rattled by the same note carried by 20,000 people? What would you give to be in that front row, staring into the face of a man who seemed more myth than mortal? The stage gleamed under spotlights. Sweat gathered on Elvis's temples, caught by the white scarf draped around his neck. Each movement, hips swinging, hand flicking, smile flashing, was magnified on the giant screens overhead. To most, he seemed untouchable, a king among mortals. But down front, near the barrier that separated stage from crowd, a different story was unfolding. Amid the frenzy of screams and raised cameras, one young woman pushed desperately forward. Her voice, thin against the roar, was drowned at first. But her persistence made her stand, out-shoving gently, pressing forward, ignoring the annoyed looks of other fans. Elvis hadn't noticed her yet. He was too focused, too in command of the moment. But that would change, because in the middle of a concert designed for spectacle, in front of thousands, one voice would soon demand to be heard. She clutched something in her hands. Nobody knew what, but she wouldn't let go. Security edged closer, watching her. Their job was simple: maintain order, keep the stars safe, let no one cross the invisible line. And yet, every few seconds, her lips formed words. She was shouting them with all the breath she had. At first, the audience around her grew irritated, even angry. They wanted to sing, to cheer, to savor Elvis. Instead, they were distracted by a young woman whose determination seemed almost reckless. But she didn't care. Her eyes stayed locked on the stage, as if the rest of the arena didn't exist. The music swelled. Elvis turned toward her section, and though he couldn't yet hear her, his gaze began to drift down. The cameras, too, started to pick her up, lenses finding the movement in the sea of bodies. And yet, in the middle of that storm, One young woman's desperate cry would silence it all. The third song of the night was underway. A high-energy run through burning love. Elvis leaned into the microphone, hips swinging, brass blaring behind him. The crowd surged with the beat, 20,000 strong, clapping and shouting each lyric. The garden had turned into a furnace of sound and light, and then something unusual, just off center stage. Security guards stiffened. The same young woman from the front row was pushing harder now, her face streaked with tears, her hand gripping the folded paper so tightly her knuckles were white. She called out again, her voice breaking against the wall of music. "Please, please, I just need to tell you something." It cut like a knife. The words didn't reach every ear in the garden, but they reached the one that mattered. Elvis stopped midline. For a man known for his relentless professionalism, stopping mid-song was almost unheard of. The band faltered for a half-second before covering the gap, horns trailing off into an uncertain hum. Fans gasped. Some shouted in confusion. Others tried to hush the woman, embarrassed by the disruption. But Elvis's head had turned, his eyes narrowing, his body leaning forward as if he could will the noise of 20,000 people into silence. What would make someone risk humiliation in front of an entire arena? What words could matter more than the music itself? The spotlight operator caught on quickly, swinging the harsh white beam down to the rail. Suddenly she was visible, her small frame illuminated in stark contrast to the sea of dark faces around her. She trembled under the light, but refused to shrink back. Her lips kept moving. "I need to tell you, please." Security held their ground, exchanging nervous looks. Protocol said no. No one touched the stage. No one breached the invisible wall between the king and his audience. But Elvis was already shaking his head. He lifted a hand mid-air, palm out, and gestured directly toward her. The crowd buzzed like static. Was he really about to stop the show? The press row scrambled with cameras, snapping furiously to capture the unusual moment. Elvis stepped closer to the edge of the stage, ignoring the murmurs in his earpiece, ignoring the anxious faces of the band behind him. He pointed at the guards, then at the girl. His voice carried over the microphone. Low but firm, "Bring her up." It was a sentence so simple, yet it cracked through the garden like thunder. The audience's roar surged, half in disbelief, half in exhilaration. Ushers hesitated, frozen between duty and the command of the man everyone had come to see, and for the young woman, hands shaking, tears brimming. The world narrowed to a single path, stairs leading up to Elvis Presley himself. The moment Elvis spoke, the tension inside Madison Square Garden shifted like a tide. Thousands of fans who had been clapping and cheering just seconds earlier now stood in suspense. Ushers froze in the aisles, security guards tightened their arms across their chests, and the spotlight held steady on the trembling figure at the barrier. She looked impossibly small beneath that beam of light. Around her, fans jostled and muttered, some irritated, others curious. To many, she was breaking the sacred rhythm of the concert they had paid to see. To Elvis, however, she was more than just a disruption. He could see the desperation etched into her face. A guard stepped forward, shaking his head. Protocol was clear. No one crossed onto the stage. Not here, not tonight, not with cameras rolling and a crowd of 20,000 to manage. Yet the king remained unmoved. His hand stayed lifted, palm open, a royal decree for all to see. The arena, once roaring, settled into an uneasy hush. What does it mean when compassion collides with rules? When the safer choice is to maintain distance, but the human choice is to reach across it. The standoff stretched into long seconds. Elvis's band kept playing softly, filling the air with a nervous vamp, but their eyes were locked on him. Would he relent, turn away, and continue? Or would he double down? The decision seemed to hang heavier than the glittering lights above. Then Elvis stepped closer to the edge of the stage. His boots caught the glare of the footlights as he bent slightly, his voice firm through the microphone. "It's all right. Let her come." The audience erupted into a divided chorus, cheers from some, gasps from others. The guard nearest the woman reluctantly relented. He offered his hand. She hesitated for a breath, then clutched it, her other hand still gripping the folded letter to her chest. Step by step, she climbed the stairs, eyes locked on Elvis as if no one else existed. The garden seemed suspended in time. For every fan who resented the delay, another was craning forward in awe, realizing they were witnessing something unrepeatable. Photographers leaned so far over the press rail that flashes bounced wildly off the sequins of Elvis's jumpsuit, and as she reached the stage, her knees buckling slightly, the reality struck. She had crossed the invisible wall. The one barrier that kept the legend on his pedestal had been lowered in front of 20,000 witnesses. Have you ever watched a rule dissolve before your eyes, replaced by something far more fragile and far more human? Her hands trembled as she stepped onto the hardwood. Elvis reached out and steadied her by the arm. The folded letter nearly slipped from her grasp, but she held it tightly, as though it contained the entire reason she had fought her way forward. The band fell silent. The crowd leaned in. The lights dimmed everywhere except the circle of brightness that now held just two figures, Elvis Presley and a young woman with something to say. And then, with the microphone just inches away, she lifted her face to speak. For a moment, she could not breathe. The lights were blinding, the silence unbearable. 20,000 people waited, their collective energy pressing down on one young woman and the king of rock and roll. Elvis steadied her with a gentle hand on her shoulder, leaning close enough for only her to hear. "Take your time." "Honey," she swallowed, clutched the folded letter, and finally spoke into the microphone. Her voice cracked, fragile but determined. "My name is Anna. From Queens." The crowd stirred, whispering her name to each other as if anchoring her in reality. Elvis nodded softly, encouraging her. Her next words cut through the air like glass. "My brother. He died last year. In Vietnam." Gasps rippled across the garden. A few shouted in sympathy, others covered their mouths. Elvis froze, his eyes locked on hers. She continued, her words trembling but clear. "The last thing we did together was listen to your music. He played your records every day. Love Me Tender was the last song we ever heard together before he shipped out." Her grip tightened on the paper in her hand. "I just wanted you to know. You gave me my brother's last happy memory." The arena went dead silent. Elvis's knees seemed to weaken. For a man who had faced screaming mobs, military service, Hollywood sets, and relentless tours, he suddenly looked disarmed, even vulnerable. His lips parted, but no words came. The microphone caught the faint hitch of his breath. What does it feel like to hear your own art tied forever to someone's final moments? Have you ever realized that something you created outlived someone else's heartbeat? The silence deepened. A single cough echoed from the upper deck, but otherwise 20,000 people stood in reverent stillness. Cameras zoomed in close, catching the moisture pooling at the corner of Elvis's eyes. His jaw trembled. He looked down, then back up at Anna, and the tears finally spilled. The king of rock and roll, movable on stage, larger than life, was weeping openly. His voice cracked into the microphone, barely more than a whisper. "Honey, I don't know what to say." Anna reached forward, offering the folded letter with both hands. Elvis took it gently, pressing it to his chest. His body shuddered with the effort of holding himself together. He leaned his forehead briefly against hers, as though drawing strength from a stranger's courage. The band had gone silent. The crowd, once wild and frenzied, now stood transfixed in collective grief. Thousands of faces glistened with tears. Mirroring the man on stage, Elvis finally managed words, his southern drawl soft and raw. "Your brother's here tonight." With us, his hand gripped the microphone stand, knuckles pale, his body tense as though he were holding the weight of the entire garden on his shoulders. The moment stretched endlessly. Flashes from the press pit illuminated his tears, captured forever on film. Bootleg tape recorders whirred in the crowd, catching the quietest, most fragile words Elvis had ever spoken on stage. Have you ever seen a man who seemed untouchable suddenly brought to his knees by compassion? What happens when a legend shows his humanity in front of the world? Elvis's voice failed him for the first time in the show. He turned away briefly, dabbing his eyes with the edge of his white scarf. The rhinestones glittered even as his tears dampened the fabric. The crowd did not boo or complain. They waited. They honored the silence. And when he turned back to Anna, his face streaked, his body trembling. It was clear the king himself could not hold back. The tears fell. The silence in Madison Square Garden hung like a cathedral bell, vibrating with emotion no one dared disturb. Elvis held the folded letter to his chest, his eyes still shimmering under the hot stage lights. Anna stood beside him, trembling, her message delivered, her grief laid bare. What could possibly follow such a moment? Elvis lifted the microphone again, his voice low and raw. "This next song, I want to dedicate to Anna and to her brother, and to every family that's given so much." His hand squeezed hers once, then released it gently. The crowd stirred, sensing what was coming. The band shifted, soft chords rising from the strings. The familiar swell of an American trilogy filled the garden, the opening notes instantly recognizable. For years, Elvis had used this song to honor his country and its struggles. But tonight, it became something else, an elegy. As his voice broke into the solemn lines of "Oh, one wish I was in the land of cotton," the audience stilled. 20,000 people who moments earlier had been shouting and clapping now stood frozen, their hearts pulled into the song's weight. Elvis's voice cracked slightly on the opening, not from strain but from emotion. The microphone carried every tremor, every breath. Anna stood a few steps behind, her hands clasped together, tears streaming freely. She wasn't hidden by the light. She was part of the performance now, the living symbol of the loss Elvis was voicing. The spotlight framed her beside him, as if she had become a second anchor for the music itself. What happens when a song ceases to be entertainment and becomes a collective prayer? Have you ever felt music transform grief into something everyone could hold together? The horns soared during the glory, glory, hallelujah, and the garden swayed, thousands rising to their feet. Men who had never cried in public wiped their eyes. Women clutched strangers' hands. Teenagers, too young to understand war but old enough to feel loss, pressed their palms to their chests, and at the center of it all, Elvis poured himself into the song. His white scarf was damp, clinging to his neck. His eyes never straying far from Anna. Each verse seemed aimed directly at her, each line carrying her brother's memory higher and higher into the rafters. The final crescendo hit like a tidal wave. His truth is marching on. Elvis's voice thundered across the arena, breaking but refusing to falter. The drums crashed, the horns screamed, and then a silence so pure it made the entire garden feel like a sacred hall. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then it began first, a ripple, then a surge. Applause roared through the venue, not the chaotic screams of adoration, but a unison ovation, thunderous and reverent. People wept openly as they clapped, as if their tears were part of the rhythm. The energy was no longer entertainment. It was communion. Elvis lowered the microphone, his chest heaving. He turned to Anna, took her hand once more, and whispered something only she could hear. She nodded through her tears. He kissed the back of her hand, a gesture so tender it drew fresh cries from the crowd. The ovation stretched on, wave after wave, crashing through the garden. Fans in the highest rows stamped their feet, shaking the rafters, while those near the stage reached desperately forward, wanting to touch even the air around Elvis and Anna. But what followed ensured this night would never fade into memory. The ovation finally ebbed, but the story of that night did not. By morning, it had already spread beyond Madison Square Garden. Reporters filed their accounts, describing how Elvis Presley, so often unshakable on stage, had wept in front of 20,000 witnesses. The New York Daily News ran the headline, "Elvis weeps at Garden." Other outlets followed suit, some framing it as spectacle, others as a rare glimpse of raw humanity. Bootleg recordings of the show circulated quickly. On the crackling tapes, you could hear the silence before Anna's words, Elvis's broken reply, and the trembling notes of an American trilogy. Fans who hadn't been there replayed the moment until the hiss of cassette tape felt sacred. For those in attendance, memory was enough. They swore the air inside the garden had changed forever. Anna herself faded back into anonymity, but not before one interview years later. Identifying herself only as Anna from Queens, she told a local paper, "Elvis gave my brother the funeral he never got. He gave my family something to hold on to." Her words carried across fan club newsletters, cited in small print but remembered with devotion. At Elvis's future concerts, subtle tributes began appearing. Fans laid flowers at the edge of the stage whenever he sang an American trilogy. Some wrote the names of their own fallen relatives on folded notes and tossed them toward him. He never forgot Anna's night. More than once, before beginning the song, he would pause and murmur, "This one's for all our boys who didn't make it home." Those who knew the story nodded, understanding the source of his weight. What makes a moment echo beyond the night it happened? Is it the cameras that capture it, or the way it takes root in the hearts of those who lived it? Years later, fan clubs still spoke of Madison Square Garden, 1972, as the night Elvis broke. Not in weakness, but in compassion. They pointed to the bootleg tapes, to the newspaper clippings, to the damp scarf preserved by a collector who claimed it still bore a tear stain. Whether or not the detail was true hardly mattered. The story itself had become legendary. For Elvis, too, the night lingered. Friends recalled that whenever an American trilogy appeared on the set list, he seemed heavier before the first note. Some nights, he closed his eyes longer than usual before singing. One close friend said, he carried that girl and her brother with him every time. The Garden concert entered history books as one of Elvis's greatest triumphs, but also as one of his most vulnerable moments. In the grand arc of his career, filled with records, films, and endless shows, this single act of compassion shone brighter than any rhinestone on his jumpsuit. And for those who were there, the memory was not just of a performance, it was of a transformation. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had become Elvis the man touched by grief, giving his stage to a stranger, and for him. That story haunted and inspired in equal measure when people remember Madison Square Garden, June 19th, 1972. They speak of the set list, the flashing cameras, the electric energy of New York City, but those who truly listened recall something else. The moment Elvis Presley let the walls fall in that arena. In front of 20,000 fans, he did more than sing. He allowed a stranger's grief to pierce his heart and share his stage. The king of rock and roll showed that beneath the rhinestones and spotlight, he was a man who could be broken and who chose compassion over perfection. What do we carry with us from nights like these? Is it the notes that echo in the rafters, or the silence that follows when humanity takes the microphone? Elvis left the garden that night not just as an entertainer, but as a witness to loss and as a vessel of healing. Anna's words became his tears. His song became her brother's memorial, and the crowd leapt forever changed. The king's tears taught a lesson larger than music, that compassion, shown in a single moment, can ripple for decades. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes music can heal. Tell us in the comments what song carries a memory you'll never forget. And if you want more moments where legends show their humanity, stay with us, because some stories deserve to be remembered forever.